social anthropological phenomena followed associated with war. He wrote in a book on the Vietnam War and its legacy, and which won him, Clifford Geertz Award. Clifford Geertz is the most famous social anthropologist in the United States. He got that award from American Anthropological, Society, and also as a result of his, the recognition he got out of that book, and he was also a distinguished professorship at the University of Cambridge. He's now a professor of social anthropology at the University of Cambridge, and he had written another book called, Theater State, 극장국가, on North Korea. And also that book, received quite, worldwide attention. He really got into new dimension of, understanding, analyzing and understanding North Korean politics from, a socio-cultural, a socio-anthropological perspective. And now he's working on a new project, and how we interpret Cold War history in the Korean, associated Korean War from transnational perspective. He's one of the most prolific researchers, and he's generated new ideas. He's also very persuasive, thinker. In fact, I, met him in Copenhagen. By at the time, the foreign minister, the lady foreign minister, Danish foreign minister organized. You have an Asian Week, right? Sometime in October, November, right? And I happened to meet him in the lobby of the hotel. I still remember that one. With that brief introduction, let us start his presentation. You'll have about 30 to 40 minutes.
30 to 40 minutes.
Talks, and we'll have Q&A sessions for 30 minutes.
I'll be quick. It's a great pleasure. Hi. Hello, everyone. It's a beautiful day. I've written a book called the North Korea Beyond Charismatic Politics a few years back, and it's been translated into Korean, and the Japanese and Chinese translations are underway. And but to be honest with you, I'm not able to engage further on, broadly speaking, North Korean studies at the moment, and I'm involved in apart from Cold War, because Europe is, I consider myself as an anthropologist whose specialty is primarily on the cultures of commemoration, if you like, and war commemoration particularly. So in that line, we are launching a major project in Europe under with the support from the European Research Council on beyond the centenary. Beyond the centenary, 2014 and 2018. So it is about the future of European political democracy and the centrality of memory of First World War in it, and etc. But at the same time, this project involves the question of how to expand the horizon of the understanding of First World War from Europe-centered understanding on centered on the Western Front, if you like, to understanding with a global perspective, inclusive of the impact and legacies of First World War in other regional contexts, including East Asia. And in the global perspective, I personally take the legacies of First World War here, inclusive of the momentous event of Russian Revolution in 1917 and the Wilsonian Declaration of Self-Determination in 1919, are living legacies in the broad East Asia and Korea, as well as in Europe. So I wrote this paper some time ago while thinking of this new project on the commemoration of war and its meanings in European context and beyond. And then in this project, while preparing this project, the question of North Korea was looming in the back of my mind, and how history of 1914 and 1918 actually relate to the questions of Korean Peninsula and East Asia is I think what I would like to. Although this is not a subject of this particular paper, on which deals with the question of the concept of sovereignty in North Korea and related question of leaders' charismatic authority in North Korean understanding of its place in the world. Nevertheless, the 1917 and 1918 mind you that Kim Il-sung, according to official history, in a very tender age, when left home and went to Manchuria in 1919. So those of you who are aware of modern Korean history, at least skeletal parts of it, 1919, the March 1st movement, 1919, which was broadly according to the spirit of Woodrow Wilson, and the end of First World War, and the failure of this peaceful and democratic revolution under the existing colonial and imperial system, and that triggered an alternative way of looking, exploring ways for self-determination through armed struggle. And at the core of this whole history, according to North Korea's official history, is the history of family of Kim Il-sung and himself, right? And so the perspective I begin to develop in this broad field of research is the fact that 1914, centenary, if you like, 1914 and 1918 is an important event for the European solidarity and the spirit of European community for the next few years and onwards. And many of us are very much concerned about it. Europe suffers from many critical structural problems at the moment, and how this memory of the First World War can be brought into this difficult time back as a way of bringing together different communities. And in that spirit, how to bring in a global perspective to this, and how the history of North Korea and the history of East Asia, Northeast Asia broadly, is very much central to a global understanding of First World War. Okay, the title I gave to the organizer of this seminar is North Korea's Legacy Politics Today, and this I'll start with a site. Although I've prepared a few pictures, I'm not able to show them to you. Apologies to that. And I start this paper with a reminder to quite interesting and for me a very important event that happened in Pyongyang last year, July. And in a way, for the first time in the country's history, North Korea opened war cemetery in July 1913. It's cemetery of the martyrs of Fatherland Liberation War, and I did have a conversation with a number of people on the meaning of opening this cemetery in 2013 in celebration of the 60th anniversary of the end of the Korean War. The end of the Korean War for North Korea has somehow changed to the the celebration of the end of the Korean War is considered in official North Korean language as the day of victory. Mind you that I was in the ceremony of Incheon amphibious landing ceremony in September, and there in South Korea as well, this Korean War, part of Korean War, are considered as a victorious event. So the Incheon landing ceremony presented the important event of the Korean War as event of victory. So the rhetorics of victory are quite shared between North and South. But nevertheless, whether it's called the Victory Day or the Armistice Day or the end of the Korean War, which was unimaginably destructive in this small land, as destructive as the First World War, reaching to the 60th anniversary, the current leader of North Korea launched this interesting project of building war cemetery, which in form looks distinct, but at the same time in structure follows broadly the tradition of European war cemeteries that was invented amid the First World War experience in Europe. What I mean is the war cemetery, the modern war cemetery is, according to the established argument in the cultural history of First World War, is actually backbone of political democracy. The war cemetery, in war cemetery, the whole notion of equality and fraternity are embodied in lucid material forms. That's the classical argument in cultural history of the First World War. First, citizens, not by their traditional statuses of class or educational background and regions and ethnicity, they join this public space as an individual citizen, right? And being an individual citizen who are equal to one another in this given public space, they also demonstrate a sense of fraternal solidarity. And so the argument in the history of First World War is such that passing the destruction of First World War, Europe has somehow started demonstrating this aesthetics of modern political democracy, although philosophically it existed in the 19th century and even before, in material terms, and this became a sacred site, not necessarily because of its place of death, but because it materialized the core principles of modern democratic polity. That's the argument. So whether we agree with this argument or not, if we decide to follow this line of reasoning, this centrality of Western Front cemeteries, the cemeteries we see in Ypres and elsewhere for the spirit of political democracy in modern West or more globally, that the observers of North Korea, including myself, has raised the question of why in North Korea, having experienced massive destructive war in 1950 and 1953, doesn't entertain a cemetery of war as such that pays tribute to the sacrifice of the people, ordinary people. And I have two pictures that I brought with me. One is the cemetery of martyrs of Fatherland Liberation War that was inaugurated in July 2013 by the current North Korean leader, and the other picture is the one site of the dead that has been very much central to North Korean political literacy or general political education of the population from 1970s onwards. This other cemetery was built after the war by Kim Il-sung's order, and then it it was renovated and it became a full-scale public sacred site in 1975 under the direction of the then successor to Kim Il-sung, Kim
By the
Jong-il.
way, Professor Kwon, what is the name, Korean name of that the cemetery?
No, 혁명열사릉, 혁명열사릉, 대성산 혁명열사릉. So it's a cemetery of martyrs, revolutionary martyrs. It's a 1975, site. And 2013 site is a cemetery of martyrs of liberation war. I'll try to make clear. The 1975 cemetery, 대성산 혁명열사릉, is a cemetery of all martyrs, doesn't have any relationship with the history of Korean War. It keeps just over 100 bodies, and some are empty tombs, but bodies of the Kim Il-sung's closest comrades from his experience in anti-colonial partisan warfare in the 1930s in northeast China. So the 1975 cemetery, as I said briefly, was built immediately after the Korean War, 1954, by Kim Il-sung, and it brought into one place all the scattered remains of his closest comrades from Manchurian era. So imagine that immediately after this kind of it was highly destructive mass mobilized war of Korean War, North Korea builds a cemetery, and in which you see not the fallen soldiers of the Korean War, but the martyrs of very old war of 1920s and 1930s, who are not even part of the Korean Peninsula at the time. And so that was one really interesting questions that provoked enormous conversations among people who approach North Korean history from the perspective of the politics of art and public art and memorial art, including myself. So the question is, what was the intention of building this originary cemetery in 1954, 혁명열사릉? It was not in Daesongsan at the time, elsewhere, before it was brought back to Daesongsan, close to Pyongyang by Kim Il-sung's successor, Kim Jong-il, in 1975. So there is a 1954, 1975, and 2013. After the Korean War, North Korea built a cemetery, almost a national cemetery, in which, although it was immediately after the Korean War, you see only the martyrs of Manchurian War, partisan war, anti-colonial war of 1930s. And there is no one that was involved in the Korean War. In 1975, Kim Jong-il expanded in a relocated cemetery and beautified it and made it really, truly something that merits the title of national cemetery. And so that was part of, in existing analysis, that was part of North Korea's important dynamic, most important dynamic at the time, and without which we can't understand the current political process of North Korea, the politics of succession of power. From 1972, sometimes some people say from the 1960s, but chronologically speaking, from 1972, 1974 to 1982, that is from Kim Il-sung's 60th birthday in 1972, and his 70th birthday in 1982, the mode of succession was established and North Korea became what it is today. So amidst this very important process, we can include the great shift of geopolitical relations in 1972 by Nixon's visit to China and with the event that some observers of Cold War history call the end of the Cold War in East Asia. And so the first event of detente between North and South, that 1972 event in Peking triggered, and an initiative that eventually failed. And so I'm not going to get into these deep events that surround 1972, and apart from the fact that at the same time where these great international events were taking place, both between Korea and between United States and China, the North Korea established, formed up its mode of power succession, and the manifestation of this is the determination of the mode of succession, power succession, was the inauguration of the National Cemetery, the renewed National Cemetery in 1975. Okay, so the politics concerning cemeteries are have been as important in North Korea as elsewhere, say in modern Europe. Although there is a great difference between North Korea and the kind of cultural commemoration we are accustomed to through installations such as in the center of Seoul, there's Heonik Kwon, etc. There's what some historians call democracy of death before democracy, political democracy in the society of the living. You have to materialize the principle of political democracy in the place of the dead before you try to actualize in the world of the living. That's how European democracy evolved. And this mode of commemoration through colonialism and etc. has been fairly globalized, including South Korea and elsewhere in Asia. But North Korea is the exception. That was the question. Why North Korea is so exceptional? How can it sustain its political order after the destructive war without this culture of commemoration that pays tribute to the sacrifice of ordinary people? And whereas what it does is a tribute to a handful of heroic actors from the anti-colonial struggle. So that now I don't have enough time to get into this question further and explain how this the meaning of this cemetery of revolutionary martyrs from Manchurian era in the political process of North Korea from as long as immediate post-war years, 1954 up to present, or more narrowly from 1972, mid-1975 to the present time. But let me focus on the meaning of 2013 new cemetery. New cemetery. Finally, so for observers like myself, finally North Korea joined the global club in terms of culture of commemoration. Right? It becomes similar to South Korea in a way. We have Heonik Kwon, they have now the cemetery of the martyrs of fatherland liberation war. And these are very much equivalent. In one place, this sacrifice of ordinary soldiers is acknowledged, and it's reciprocated by the other side. So, and also in globally speaking, the North Korea somehow it takes part in the in international world, or if you like, at least in this domain of political culture, it is trying to normalize itself or whatever. But but I would like to just a few more minutes. But I take this site really interesting in another way. And now, at the moment, it's a human rights issue against sovereignty claims by North Korea, human rights claims by the international world. I don't know how broad is the international world. It's not unified international world. There are cleavages, but European Union is into it, and South Korea is part of it, United States and Japan, and many other different nations. So it looks as though on human rights issue, at the moment, the whole world is against North Korea on human rights terms, right? And then the North Korea perceives its sovereignty question is again at stake. I think it is quite understandable from the political leader, from the perspective of North Korean political leaders, that it's a really dangerous moment. So let's say the human rights and sovereignty. But how to understand this question of sovereignty in the way the North Korean political order conceives of it? Right. I'm not sure about the people, but at least this how the polity wants its people and the outside world to understand this question of sovereignty. So I would like to use the last 2 or 3 minutes by linking this new cemetery and the old cemetery to the question of sovereignty. At the core of these sovereignty questions, after the establishment of first succession of power in the 1970s, is what North Korea in contemporary language called this the supreme dignity. There's the 최고전엄. The 최고전엄 consists of the center of the political order without which the entire sovereign order cannot subsist and cannot possibly considering itself as a meaningful political life. So the charismatic authority, whether it's by Kim Il-sung or his successor Kim Jong-il or the current leader, is at the center of the making of the concept of sovereignty in North Korea. So we can't really think of the sovereignty claims by North Korea in kind of familiar liberal terms, that the sovereignty from the people, although North Korea is formally a democratic society and democratic, a constitutional democratic society, that constitutionally the power comes from the people and it's the government is representational government. We know that in actuality it has gone through a particular trajectory in modern history. So this question of representation takes on different forms in North Korea as well as in other former revolutionary socialist states. So let's take it as a fact that at the center of this concept of sovereignty there is this unchallengeable, the perpetual, the charismatic authority, the authority of the leader. But they are different, and then North Korea's current politics is very much, since the death of Kim Il-sung, 1994, very much centered on what they call legacy politics. It's a 유훈 정치. It's a politics that defines itself as a vanguard in the defense of the sovereign authority, the charismatic authority, the founding charismatic authority, and so the charismatic authority after 1994 became a question of legacy on the one hand, a question of past legacy, but at the same time, the center continues to be present in the concept of sovereignty as a legacy that has to be defended and protected. But after 2011, we have two legacies to handle. I mean, North Korean political order has two sovereign legacies, two charismatic authorities to handle rather than one. So in this paper, I introduced as a start-up point this really very classical work by Ernest Kantorowicz's book called "The King's Two Bodies." The Kantorowicz is a very eminent scholar of late medieval and early modern European politics, focus on what some scholars call these days political religion. How religious you have to be actually to build up modern politics and that sort of thing. So modern politics is not a process, is not an outcome of secularization, it's transformation of the concept of religious into the political. So, but in the book, you're very famous, you're familiar with Shakespeare's, is the question of how to make a leader out of king, or how to make a king out of this, how to free king from the subordination of the authority of church and all the rest of it. But anyway, in clear terms, he introduces these two concepts. The king has a modern king. It's a modern politics. In the modern politics, king has two bodies. One is super, what is it called? A metaphysical body that has to live beyond the confine of the life of his physical body. And there is this body, natural, physical body. So it is Kantor which argues that what to do with this, the question of the biological and metaphysical in the body of the king constitutes the birth of modern state, and then how the various questions relating to the relationship between religious ideas and political principles it have to be understood in order to come to terms with the transition of Europe from, let's say, 16th to mid 18th century. So what I'm saying is this: North Korea. I'll finish in a minute. North Korea has confronted similar questions since 1994. So after the death of Kim Il-sung, you have Kim Il-sung's physical body to deal with. It is duly embalmed and displayed to the public. And its metaphysical body, it's what North Korea calls Kim Il-sung's political body or political life. So it has to be made into this political body. The protection and the perpetuation of the life of this political body of Kim Il-sung is existing politics 해정됐. And 2011, you have another body to deal with. So Kim Jong-il has a super body, metaphysical body, and physical body too. So now, in a much more complex way than the scholars of scholars of modern Europe has ever considered, North Korea has four bodies to come to terms with. Two are physical bodies, the other two are metaphysical bodies. And these two bodies, how to haggle with these four bodies and the relationship between the metaphysical bodies of two defunct leaders, I think is very much a vexing question for North Korean leaders and the artists who are working with them. And so, considering this, ever since in recent days, in the realm of political art, I mentioned that I say political art, and then again, the political art in North Korea is inseparable from politics. So when we talk about art, we are not talking about fine art as such, but it is in classical revolutionary socialist sense of art for it is the life of art that is intertwined with the life of political movement. But in the realm of this art, there are two contrary streams going on. I can't go into details about this. On the one hand, there seems to be a current that tries to bring out certain aesthetics of parallelism between the two sovereign legacies, two charismatic leaders. So Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, statues you build up, kind of twin statues, and the two leaders stand hand in hand together, and this form is replicated, first manifested in Pyongyang, and have begun to be replicated elsewhere in important cities, right? But at the same time, so what I'm saying is, there is a current in North Korean political art to bring the authority of Kim Jong-il as majestic as Kim Il-sung. So there is a certain current. There is a different current, though, which I'll get into in a moment. But here, I would like to make it clear that in the legacy of Kim Il Sung and legacy of Kim Jong Il are not the same legacies. Both historical sense and in the sense of relationship between North Korean polity and its society. On the one hand, Kim Il Sung is, in North Korean terms, is truly sovereign legacy. It created a polity, and he was a hero of anti-colonial movement, and it was everything. But at the same time, Kim Jong-il earned the title of charismatic leader with authentic claim for authentic authority as Kim Il-sung had, but as part of what I call in this paper instrumental authority of whose meaning is solely and principally on the defense of sovereign authority from fading and getting distorted and being challenged. So from 1972, Kim Jong-il's claim to the position of succession was he is a leader of this instrumental politics whose meaning was to maintain the originary sovereign legacy of the founding father, right? And after his death in 2011, what happens to the sovereign legacy of the founding ancestor of the polity and the instrumental authority of the second generation leader, and how the third generation leader haggles with these two legacies and defines its meaning of existence, is, in my view, has been a struggle of epic proportion in North Korean politics and art. So let me go back to the cemetery of the 2013 cemetery of the Martyrs of Fatherland Liberation War. If you see this, it embodies both the Kim Il-sung's and Kim Jong-il's legacy. Kim Il-sung fought not only in Manchurian War of independence, but he was a leader of the Korean War that North Korea fought. So by bringing justice to the sacrifice of ordinary people whose leader was Kim Il-sung, it makes a tribute not only to the people but also to the leader of the war effort. So, and Kim Jong-il had nothing to do with the experience of Korean War in North Korean history, although there are some really weird mythic versions. So, but at the same time, it materialized the instrumental legacy of Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-il built his authority as an instrument of the perpetuation of the sovereign legacy, and one of important outcomes of this effort was inauguration of 1975 cemetery of revolutionary martyrs. And following closely this art, the art of politics, the new leader of North Korea has built this new cemetery in a much more grandiose way, and made a tribute to the two defunct leaders. On the one hand, to the first leaders, eminent and majestic, material legacy, as well as to the second generation leaders, legacy of revolutionary art that works to defend the sovereign legacy. But at the same time, the efforts to raise the authority of Kim Jong-il to a status akin to that of Kim Il-sung, what I call in this paper as a parallelist movement. And there is another side of parallelism in North Korean politics at the moment, which is a question of nuclear arms and economic development. And this parallelism between art and parallelism in policy are closely interacted together. I can't get into that. But anyway, so at the end of this paper, I raised this question: the North Korean, at least in the realm of artistic demonstration, which is, in my mind, what the state wants its people and outside world to see. There are two currents. On the one hand, the instrumental legacy of second generation and sovereign legacy of first generation are brought into a perilous existence. On the other hand, with the site of with a new site of memory, such as the cemetery of martyrs of Fatherland Liberation War, inaugurated in 2013, although it looks as though it makes a tribute to both leaders, at the same time, the making of this tribute makes it very clear the towering difference between the founding sovereign authority of the first leader and the instrumental legacy of the second leader. I'm not sure whether I'm making clear, but when people make tribute to the 2013 cemetery, you see, and then in public events that came with it, the people saw only the portrait of Kim Il Sung, that young Kim Il Sung of 1953 armistice agreement and his declaration of the victory of a Korean War immediately afterwards, and that they are also aware of the fact that this this way of making tribute to the honor of the this originary leader is very familiar and established tradition in North Korean civic duty and civic reality. And so what I'm saying is basically at the conclusive remark, that concluding remark, that in the realm of public art, one can observe a certain contrary trends. One of the major artistic achievements that Kim Jong-il made as part of his rise to power was the graves of revolutionary martyrs in 1975. And in July 2013, the new leader of North Korea inaugurated a new site of memory, the graves of the martyrs of the Fatherland Liberation War. In form, the 2013 grave closely follows the tradition of artistic revolution established, or art of successional power established by the first successor and replicates this leader's 1975 initiative. In substance, however, empowering the memory of the Korean War has no relevance for sublimating Kim Jong-il's legacy, and therefore the act may be understood as one that empowers the founding sovereign leader's majesty using the technique of art invented by this leader's immediate successor. It also, as I opened up at the very outset, that it also opens up a way of arduous and continuous search on the part of, I think, North Korean political leadership, as well as the artistic sectors, to take part, to transform its public art in increasingly on a par with the global level. So I take this, on the one hand, as a positive sign. The conclusion is this is good, and North Korea finally joins the global culture of war commemoration. But at the same time, this site also has a relevance for thinking through what sorts of struggles going on within North Korea, and how, by observing these sites of memories, we can tease out certain important the dynamics involved in the progression of North Korea's claim for its historical sovereignty as well as a part in world society. I'll end that with that. Thank you. Yeah.
Imaginative interpretation. Now I'll open it up to the floor. Yes, Ambassador Kim.
Yeah. To a certain extent, I can agree with your conclusion about the positive side of the new cemetery. But at the outset, you said the North Korean history is the history of